All right. Wow, I actually get to see faces. This is great. Oh, I gotta work on a cool background too. I like the kelp. Good one, Colin. Yeah. Awesome. Uh, I'm gonna just give it a couple minutes to allow people to show up. So stand by while I push a couple more updates on the lab. So we'll start at 9:33 promptly. It's 9:31 now. And can everybody hear me okay? Cool. Ooh. Okay. Let's go ahead and get started. And thank you all for coming, for bringing your shiny faces. I hope everybody had a good holiday and feeling recharged despite the COVID conditions keeping us at home. And we have all of the med students back, the Masters of Environmental and Data Science program I see. And there's also a few new folks too. So hopefully we'll get a chance to all get to know each other better once we get going. Yeah, I am going to go ahead and share my screen. And also this video, this lecture is being recorded, and then I'll post these for later viewing. There's at least one person who wasn't able to make it today because of travel. So you can check out the video later too. Okay. All right. Whoops. Wrong share. And let's share screen. Okay, so you can see lab 1 species distribution modeling on the screen right now, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. So hopefully you all are here because I posted this link in Slack, as well as invited you all to a Google Calendar event. So it's showing up there. And this is the course website, similar to set up to how we had last quarter with the project management class. And this quote it's very like, it's a little on the scary / powerful kind of slant, where Stephen Hawking was saying that AI, so machine learning, is a subset of artificial intelligence. And he's saying that it could do all the things, eradicate war, disease, and poverty, but it could be the last big event because it could spell our demise. So we'll talk a little bit about the ethics of AI at the very end of the class. You can see the course schedule here, and I'm going to go into that. I'm going to start with an introduction into just generally machine learning. And then we're going to be moving into species distribution modeling as a first case in how to do machine learning. And in this case, you're either predicting the presence or the absence of a species. And there's a lot of different approaches to doing that. And you can learn the basic setup of splitting, fitting, and then testing and evaluating a given model with that approach. We have readings for the class that are listed here too. This first one is just kind of talking about the promise of applying machine learning techniques, more modern techniques for environmental sciences, and more specifically to like more civil engineering and water quality and that sort of thing. And then this Elith and Leithwick one is more specific to species distribution modeling. So I'll go into that in more detail. I have this schedule later in the introduction posted, and once we talk about the bigger categories, this will also make a little bit more sense, but it doesn't hurt to repeat. So this species one, we're going to spend 4 lecture and lab sessions, 4 days on that. And then the lab will be due after the January 17th holiday, so Wednesday. And I'm going to poll you all for when a good office hour time might be. I think ideally on Tuesdays. That way we can, things will be due on Wednesday morning before class. And then if I'm available, say Tuesday afternoon, if there's a slot that works for you all, that would be ideal. Because then we're also meeting Monday. And generally the other labs are due on a Wednesday, given the holiday schedule. So, so yeah, we're moving from species to communities as far as the actual environmental examples. And then another aside, really, it's not strictly in the traditional thinking of machine learning, but another common task in environmental science is conservation planning. So if you want to figure out where you want a terrestrial or marine reserve, and you have all these biodiversity targets, then there are some interesting ways that you can optimize that solution. And I'll show an example of that for conservation planning's sake. So, and it uses this other kind of tricky thing now called integer linear programming. So then there'll be a midterm, and the I debated about whether to have a group project for this class or do exams. I want to encourage the readings, and I think there's a lot that you can get from these review articles, as well as some of the other primary literature that I'll be sharing your way. And that's what I also want to quiz on, and then the actual with the concepts, and then the doing will be with the labs. And that's where you'll get your hands dirty, or keyboard sturdy, I guess, with the data and the wrangling and the fitting and predicting with the models. And then we're going to go into the deep learning. So this is a subset of machine learning, and we're going to take a set of photographs of species collected by iNaturalist, and work on a subset of those photos. So everybody's going to actually today you'll actually pick a species, and I want everybody to do a different species so we can get a nice gallery and array, whether it's terrestrial or marine. And then we're going to actually build a species distribution model using a bunch of different techniques. And today we'll go get the data for that. And then on the deep learning side, we're going to also look at species, but photographs, not presence per se. And what's amazing is that you can have like really complex inputs, like a photograph, that now with these techniques can classify what species is in that photograph. And so now there's a iNaturalist has a little phone app, and the fitting of that model is quite expensive computationally, but the actual prediction using the model is quite cheap and runs off your phone. So that's what is the newest exciting thing in machine learning happening these days. That's really allowing self-driving cars to be on the roads, and allowing you to talk to Alexa, and that's all allowing machines to learn in this new way, actually using fairly simple math, but just the way it's configured. And then we'll end with doing some machine learning exercises, or we'll nearly end with doing some machine learning exercises in Google Earth Engine. And so this also represents a trend going from, we'll start doing species distribution models in your local machine. And then this Google Earth Engine is quite cool because you're able to access petabytes of the global satellite record and run it in an instant. And you can do these supervised and unsupervised classification techniques. Like if you're gonna probably use random forest to classify wetlands, and then use some clustering techniques to classify land cover types. But then you can also hook it up with the TensorFlow and use these more complex deep learning algorithms to classify even objects that are more complicated in nature. So that kind of completes with the Google Earth Engine what we'll be doing as far as labs go. And then there'll be one more little module on bias. And I actually will do some code, but it's just the concepts that you'll be tested on the final exam from that. And then we'll have an expert panel discussion at the very end. I might toggle those days depending on people's availability, but I'll be talking with like the folks at iNaturalist and some other people that have applied deep learning to species distribution models. And anyway, some other interesting folks. We'll see who we can get by then. So that's a big picture overview. And the only other thing that I might be adding is there's so many cool things on these things called Kaggles. So if you go to kaggle.com, you can see all these competitions for doing machine learning. And they really, I'll show you how this applies. They have all these competitions, and there's everything under the sun here. So this Titanic is like that's like the beginner competition. That's where you can learn your chops, and they have a whole bunch of different notebooks that you can run with R or Python or Julia. And that example is we're using in a more environmental orientation of that. But in that case, the Titanic data set is saying, okay, here's all the passengers on board. That's our set of predictors, where they came from, what their ages, their gender, et cetera. And then the idea of the model is to then predict who's going to live or die. And you're given a subset of the training data, and then you evaluate the performance of your model with the test data set that they set aside. And so that's pretty much how all of these competitions work. So I think one other little assignment that I'll do is just to have you write up and report maybe towards the end of the quarter on one of these competitions that is really appealing to you. There's all kinds of stuff in here that's quite cool, like protecting the Great Barrier Reef. That looks environmental. Flower classification, that's environmental. So yeah, there's thousands of these things. And in some cases, there are rewards for this, cash awards, if you get the best performance on a model, or even jobs. And yeah, there's been ones on like continuous plankton recorders going out to sea, and they take images of all these plankton in the camera, and then your job is to classify them automatically, or trying to classify whale sounds and identify what species it is, sometimes even individual from the whale sound. So they're here, and it's a fun space to explore. So I'll encourage that, I think, with a little assignment add-on. Okay, so let's go ahead, and I also feel free to, let's see if I, yeah, I'm gonna periodically look in the chat, and you can also raise a hand. And I would love to, keep this fairly loose and fun and informal if we can, and encourage you guys to chime in with questions or comments. But let's go ahead to let me make sure that this, thank you. Somebody mentioned that link wasn't going to the right place. Now it's going to the right place. Good. And then this is going to the right place. Yep, that's going to the right place. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more now about machine learning. So what is it? So this is my extremely loose definition of machine learning, and it's generally about making predictions using data and computational techniques. So predictions, data, computation. If you have any combination of those three things, then I think you can generally call it machine learning. There are some more nitpicky definitions out there, but that actually like try to get at the learning aspect of the machine. But let's just dive into it and look at, this is from this great book, Hands-On Machine Learning with Scikit-Learn and TensorFlow. So these are this is the Python stack of tools, and this is probably the most popular book on this topic. And here are some of the images. I encourage you to check out this chapter 1 that this is linked to. But the traditional approach is, okay, yeah, we study the problem, maybe we write some rules. So you could imagine some if-else statements, and there's some logic that defines how we separate and make some sort of prediction. The machine learning approach is formulating a model that then learns what the relationship is with the data between the predictors, that is the input data, and then the response that you're trying to predict. And and you evaluate that to figure out, like, okay, is that with some usually subset of the data. This can be changed so that maybe the part of the process automatically updates as data gets ingested. Then maybe we update our model on the fly. Or maybe there's humans in there that can go in and look at like some anomalous data or fix some of the classifications. Like one of the examples I mentioned later is Google Photos does this thing where it says, oh, is this person, or oh, is this person, and asks you to confirm or deny. That's called reinforcement learning. So that's yeah, where humans and machines are combined. So there are these two large classes of learning. One is called supervised, and the other one is unsupervised. And really, just the difference is what is the response already labeled. And what that means, like if we were to take this binary response of either present or not present, let's say we have some initial data about where a species is present or absent. And that's the present would be the green circles. And this is, we have two axes so of predictors. So maybe this is like temperature, and maybe this is rainfall, something like that. And this is where it looks like, okay, this species prefers warmer and note warmer temperatures, but not really differentiated along rainfall along the second axis from the absent data. And then the question is, if we have some new data point, some location, some pixel on a map, so let's say that corresponds with this amount of temperature and this amount of rainfall, or this is the other new data point, then would we classify this point as present or absent? So the input data that we fit our model on is has a label, and we're trying to recover that label with the model. So that's what that means, is it's labeled. And you could see, you could imagine that if you could do just a little regression here, and this data point up, this blue new data point up high would have more difficulty disambiguating from this data point that's more nested within the other presence points. So another example of supervised learning maybe is spam filtering. So how do you differentiate between email that is spam and is not spam? And so that's a binary thing. And and then another example would be, instead of a classification, like the last two examples, would be a regression, where we're trying to fit a relationship between this one axis and some response value, and at some new instance along this axis. Maybe it's time, maybe it's something else, but what would the value be? So that's simple regression. Now, unsupervised learning is we think of this as like clustering and ordination fall into these categories. So we don't necessarily know what the response is. We are allowing the data to inform, let's say in this case, it's like a community or a cluster. So I'll show an example later where I was involved in looking at where whales are observed, and then clustering different species based on a similar environmental habitat. And ordination is reducing the dimensionality of problems, maybe into, like, you might have heard of PCA or other ordination techniques, non-metric multidimensional scaling, where basically you can take a whole bunch of environmental variables and then collapse them into two axes that allows you to describe environmental spread between different data points. Those are two different types of unsupervised learning. Another one might be, imagine this is, the axes is like X and Y, and you have an image, and you're trying to cluster based on similar pixel properties. That's called image segmentation, and that's another unsupervised approach that we'll do with the Google Earth Engine. We'll cluster on similar signatures, spectral signatures. So those are two very broad categories of different types of approaches. So let's just look at this one as unsupervised. Let's say here's a training data set, and then, well, there was another image here that basically drew dashed lines between these visual clusters, and that's a basic clustering. This one is ordinating and clustering, and so the axes might be mixed with all kinds of input data. Semi-supervised, this is what I was mentioning before, where maybe you have this Google Photos is trying to automatically label your associate faces in your photographs with people that you've labeled, and then it'll prompt you like, hey, help me fit my model better by determining what is this photo? Who is this? Do I have the right person? If not, who is it? And that's semi-supervised, or basically where the human can get involved with updating the fit of the model. That is actually which is actually different than reinforcement learning. The thing that I might have misspoke about is that there's this updating schedule to both these approaches. The semi-supervised learning, there's extra verification and there's an iteration there. There's also an iterative approach here with reinforcement. But the idea is that there's, in this case, that there's more a computational setup for points to punish and reward as it updates, so it does a better job in training. Yeah, so this is how, for instance, self-driving cars learn how to drive. Is it'll get penalized when it hits something and rewarded if it doesn't. Or in this case, we got a little robot that is trying not to, it's learning it's okay to touch water but not fire. So these are the broad types of learning. And yeah, supervised, we have a label, unsupervised, we don't. And then reinforcement, there's this iteration. And semi-supervised is somewhere kind of nested in supervised. So what you'll see time and again with doing this stuff is that most of this, as with most data science, most of the work is in the data wrangling and setup, and then and the evaluation and interpretation. And usually once you set up everything, the fitting and the predicting is usually just a one-liner. Even the evaluation, there are multiple techniques, but this is a pretty consistent design. And if you use Esri's ArcGIS then you'll recognize this model builder kind of style I took with this little diagram. So the input data that's new is in the blue ovals. The outputs are in the green ovals, and then the process steps are the yellow boxes. I'm going to get to this question. Thanks, Desik, for that. After I talk a little bit more about this. So in this case, eventually we're trying to predict Y given X. So X is capitalized because it's not just one X, it's usually many predictors. And in a simple linear model, we might have a coefficient on each of those predictors to figure out the relationship between the predictor and the response variable. But how we define that relationship is where all the complexities can happen with actual modeling. But before we fit data to get at that relationship between our predictors and our response, we want to split the data. And splitting the data then allows us to evaluate, well, how well did we do? So we're going to talk about confusion matrices and receiver operator characteristic curves and things that allow you to look at the ratio of false negatives and false positives based on your test data. And then if we have entirely new data, then we can predict with this model. And then we have some measures of confidence about that prediction associated with the model. And then we get our prediction for some new Y value. So this is X new, this is Y new over here. And Y, so, okay. So now I want to go back to these questions. Is the difference between when you would supervise and unsupervised depend on whether it's binary or not? Or is there more to it? So this is where I think maybe by next time I can elaborate on how the X's and Y's can vary based on their data type, because it's a really good point and it has a lot of repercussions. So the difference between supervised and unsupervised is not dependent on what necessarily it being binary or not. It's more that the like unsupervised, you don't really know what Y is. If I'm trying to define a cluster, I don't really know what that cluster is already. So that's why it's unlabeled. Or if I'm trying to cluster pixels in an image to segment the image, I don't really know what those are. And that's what makes it unsupervised. It's not that it's binary or not. You can have binary or categorical or continuous data for any predictor or any response. And then that would then determine how you would set up these models differently. And actually it's interesting with this presence versus absence, we can treat that as a categorical data type, and then we can use we can classify the outputs as being present or absent and have some amount of certainty with that. We can actually also do a binary. You can also do a logit, and so you'll get a response that varies from 0 to 1, and then you determine a threshold to then convert that continuous response into binary. So we'll get into this more of the modeling stuff next time. It's a really good question about what types of data we're getting on the predictor side and the response side, and there's every combination possible, basically. And what, especially on the response side, what that is will determine a lot of the models available. Okay, next question. I think the Google Photos AI is the mixed, so people check the outputs and correct the input images and categories. Yeah. Yeah, so Google Photos suggests a given classification of that image, and then you say whether it's correct or not. So that's that semi-supervised example. Okay. So yeah, cool. I love it. Okay, so this is great. The bias one. Okay. So we're going to talk about that at the very end. There's actually a really nice little Kaggle course module on bias. You know, it's basically, in a nutshell, I just want to say with the bias that if it's garbage in, it's garbage out, or if it's human nature in, it's human nature out. So it can exaggerate some racial bias and some other tendencies. So that's pretty cool. And CAPTCHA tools, see, CAPTCHA tools, that's another, there's so many cool little use cases. So I'll, CAPTCHA, originally, the guy who set up CAPTCHA, he realized how many human hours were spent doing these little tasks of confirming you're a human and not a bot. And then he realized, like, oh, we can actually use that to help with the classification. Like, is this a street light, or what's this? What are the letters here? And originally, that's how a lot of old texts got translated, and optical character recognition machines got developed, was to actually get humans to build the training data set by giving them the CAPTCHAs and then looking at agreement amongst humans. And then that same guy who started the CAPTCHA actually launched the Duolingo app, and then used that same logic to actually help build translation machine learning models. So yeah, it's a good example. Okay, so at the Kaggle competitions, you know, we don't have necessarily the new data. We just have the test data, and then you evaluate, and then you get this performance, and then there's a leaderboard, and whoever has the best performance wins. So there's all kinds of cool competitions. I encourage you guys to check out Kaggle.com. It's a major learning ground and learning space for this stuff. And really they're focused on, they provide the split data sets usually. And you can actually set up your own competition, just upload the data sets and then describe the problem and set up a way to evaluate those test data sets, and away you go. So now let's talk about AI is a superset of machine learning, is a superset of deep learning. So artificial intelligence is, I guess it goes back to like Alan Turing back in the 1940s. He was a code breaker, World War II, and kind of like considered maybe the founder of computer science, modern computer science as we know it. And he really talked about what would be an intelligent machine. And, and then the computation actually caught up. And with machine learning, we were able to do a lot of stuff to basically describe relationships between things we see and things that we want to predict. And then deep learning is this specific configuration of like neural nets. And I'll show some examples of like what that thinking is behind that. That allows you to feed training data with really complex input data, and then depending on the layers of these neural nets and how they're configured, it can then do a decent job, quite actually incredible job, in fact, with more modern tasks, like beating the world champion in Go. Chess was done years back, but it took deep learning to actually beat the human champion at Go, which has it's like Chinese checkers, but actually has more combinations than something like Sands on our grains of sand and it's on our planet or something ridiculous. Anyway, really hard to solve for, but they did it. And then, this machine learning and AI in general, it's quite popular, as I'm sure you all have gathered. The Wired founder says basically all businesses are starting with take X and add AI. Google CEO, basically they look at everything that they're doing now as being a machine learning task. Obviously being a search engine, you'll notice that when you do the search, it understands the context of like, oh, are you looking up an actor or a movie, and gives you kind of content specific information. And then, and Amazon, the biggest companies, and Apple is really the biggest companies on the planet are basically using AI for pretty much everything. And you see with Amazon with recommending products, movies, deals, detecting fraud, doing translations, etc. So the data scientists, you guys are doing that. And then I would say a subset is machine learning. They get paid a little bit more on average. As far as the popularity goes, Andrew Ng taught this machine learning course at Stanford a few years back, 2012 or 14 maybe. And it was one of the earlier massive online open courses. It's actually what prompted him to launch the Coursera platform. And now there's 4.6 million students who've enrolled in it. So wildly popular. And this is a cool little graphic. 2015 was when DeepMind's AlphaGo beat them. But if you click on this link, you can see a lot more history of machine learning, and it's kind of fun the way they set it up. And so they go way back into the 1800s, and anyway, here's the Alan Turing kind of stuff. Oh, and 36, first neural network. Anyway, feel free to check that out. Okay, so let's talk about just applying it to actually environmental science and ecology. And we can look at like kind of how we are starting with an individual species, and then we're going to a community. Can look at individuals or populations or groups, landscape, ecosystem, global. So obviously there's a scaling that's increasing here. We can identify plants and animals. We'll be doing that with the iNaturalist data set and deep learning. We can classify bird songs, plant phenotypes. There's an app to help you maintain your house plants, and it looks at the colors of the leaf and tells you if it needs water or sun or whatnot. Disease on crop leaves. Wild animal counts. We can get aerial imagery even from satellite. Now they're counting seals and even penguins from satellite imagery. The response variable, rather than being an individual species present or absent, it could be the density of that species, or it could even be a diversity metric, like what is the richness, the number of species we might expect to see. And then we can estimate carbon and water quality, fisheries, lots of stuff. So now this is an interesting paper. I like their figures talking about neural nets. So in the real world, you just take an image. There's a lot happening in our brains to look to understand that that's a flower, but we don't understand what's happening in our brains necessarily. And to do this in a deep learning environment, there's a lot of setup to maybe orient the image, find what might be identifiable as a flower, and then generate features that then you feed into the deep learning model to fit it, and then you get out this predicted class, maybe with some confidence score. And they're called neural nets because they are similar to biological, or what's thought of as our biological axons or neurons that connect one to the other. And there's a certain amount of potentiation needed to then transmit and connect neuron to neuron. And so similarly, there's these synaptic weights, and some little tiny neuron that has basically can switch on and off, and then you can combine those in these layers to then get really complex thinking about, like, oh, well, that's a petal based on the contour and the general orientation of the shape and the color, and each of those little neurons can combine to get at that logic that you don't have to pre-program. It'll fit those neurons according to the data. And yeah, so this was the major innovation in getting this, and we'll talk about actually setting these different features up, like with imagery in deep learning. And then this is in this example, they were using also iNaturalist as their reference system. And you can do this with imagery or with sound, video. And this is showing you, for instance, okay, here we've classified this as like some fish. Here, this is actually doing the object detection within the image, drawing a box around it. And then here, this is doing the segmentation, actually describing the shape of it. So this type of technique is being used to estimate even like the health of female right whales based on their body shape, that using these kinds of techniques. Spectrograms, you can basically visualize an audio signal with a spectrogram, and that's what we're seeing with time on the X and octave on the Y, and then the color is an intensity or decibel value. And you can classify these and then even get to a species or even an individual level. Yeah. So species to ecosystems, mapping ghost fishing gear. I do more marine things, so I find these interesting. I mentioned plankton, marine mammal calls. Yeah. And for biodiversity, we can obviously use satellite imagery, drone imagery. We can use sensors on animals, animal telemetry tagging, and camera traps. So you can imagine that historically processing so many images, like some poor human having to sit there and flag them all. So the fact that now we can do this, and then we can do quality control with a human on a few of them, especially where there's low confidence, and then update the model, acoustic sensors, and then citizen science or community science, as it's called now. That's what iNaturalist is as a platform too. So quite cool. I like this image. It's kind of fun because you can see that they're just talking about getting different things. So detection and localization. So that's maybe from some aerial imagery. You can say, identify, oh, here's a wildebeest, here's a zebra. But maybe we could actually, if we have enough information, we can identify based on the stripes which zebra it is. And then there's even, we can look at like their posture and their gait, and sports science is doing this big time. And then environmental reconstruction. So yeah, how much food maybe is available plant-wise. Yeah. And then here's an example of how this is being used to actually monitor wolf reintroductions and potential threats. And there's a whole conservation angle with protecting endangered species using these real-time detection and alert systems that can actually send alerts to people. In fact, Brazil, they really reduced their deforestation years back. Unfortunately, it's kicked right back up again with leadership and political leadership now. But years back, they starting in like 2008, they were sending alerts to authorities to once deforestation beyond like 10 or 20% within parcels within the Amazon that were privately owned was detected. So anyway, yeah, and it just goes on. So this is a little video actually analyzing, I think, where beetles were moving around in an experiment and tracking. This is genetics. That's bioinformatics. That term has been co-opted pretty much to the genetic field, even though it's biology is more broad and ecoinformatics is like more of the stuff I've been talking about. So obviously that's huge for finding cures and COVID cures, etc. I want to give a shout out to AI for Earth. There's at least one person from NCEAS who is auditing, who's actually, there's an AI for Earth program at NCEAS. And it's what's actually pretty cool is when I was at Duke for doing my grad work, it was Lucas Joppa who first started AI for Earth. That was a grad student there, and it was Scott Laurie who started iNaturalist. So yeah, these are friends that have like made a real mark in the world and done really cool stuff. Anyway, this is you can click on this link and go see some of the open source code for doing these types of activities. I just want to give you a gander of the types of things possible with these techniques. So like I said, you know, we're starting with a really simple binary response to learn these techniques, especially how to set up this sort of iteration from one thing, from splitting to then fitting to then evaluating and predicting. And we're going to use a bunch of different techniques and see how they vary. And you can even combine those models into using ensemble modeling. And that's what happens like for IPCC does this for predicting climate change. And then we'll go into this unsupervised approaches with communities where we don't know yet what it is, what the clustering is, or how those axes might be reduced into fewer axes. But we'll play with that. And then we'll go into conservation planning. And then we'll have our midterm on that. And this is all going to be using R for the first half of the class. And then deep learning, you can do it in R, but they basically, JJ Allaire and the RStudio folks, they developed this package called Reticulate, which actually allows R to communicate more seamlessly with Python, specifically to get the deep learning stuff to work, because there isn't a direct TensorFlow or PyTorch or these other deep learning frameworks. So rather than using the R in-between layer, we're going to directly use Python. And there's an orchestration layer called Keras that we're also going to be using. Anyway, we'll get into deep learning after the midterm. And then and then Google Earth Engine and something on bias. And that's where we're going to be basically in the Python world. We might do a little JavaScript with Google Earth Engine, just because you get really quick feedback. But that's just a syntax difference. Yeah. And then we'll end with an expert panel. So I just want to show a few examples of work that I was involved in that was doing these kinds of things. I haven't actually done the deep learning. I've just been playing on the periphery. I don't have any published work applying deep learning, so I'm really excited to learn. Was interrupting me. Whoa, that was weird. Can you guys still hear me? Okay, cool. Wow. Just got totally lost there. Too many tabs. Okay. I gotta stop talking so we can actually, you guys can do something in the lab. Okay, so this is just an example of predicting species. In this case, taking a bunch of aerial and boat surveys and predicting whales and dolphins throughout the eastern Atlantic seaboard and Gulf of Mexico. And in this case, it's actually predicting the number of individuals, so not just binary, but underneath there's one model that fits like what the group size would be of an expected counter that then just gets multiplied based on the likelihood of actually encountering. So that part is actually 1 or 0 response. This is a community example of then looking at these different species and trying to understand what is the environmental relationship. How do species cluster with similar habitats? And then this is an ordination example of collapsing the environmental data associated with where these species are seen, and then looking at the various variables in the background to look at how these species, what is their niche in as far as these predictors goes with chlorophyll A, primary productivity, sea surface temperature, distance to coast, or depth. And this was one predicting, so the United Nations is rewriting the law of the sea, and they're wanting to know for areas beyond national jurisdiction, where is it that we can protect the seafloor from mining and the sea surface from fishing to afford the greatest conservation. And so in this case, it's an optimization, multi-objective optimization routine that's trying to conserve all of these different species while minimizing impacts on fishing, and then setting up that design. So you guys will do something similar. And then this is just the Google Earth engine. Here showing the JavaScript for taking train data and then classifying it. You see it's one-liners to actually do the training and the fitting and the prediction, and then showing it on a map with the input training points and then the output classified plot. So that's a supervised classification because we have training points to input. Okay, so now let's just talk about the first part of this lab, which is just picking a species and then getting into species distribution modeling. So with species distribution modeling, we're going from geographic space where we have points of observation, and then we're viewing it then in variable space or environmental space. So this is this niche. Like how does this species, the question is with the model is, how does this species uniquely occupying some niche compared to all of the available background environment? And then once you have that relationship defined in a fitted model, then you can then take, let's say, data on the entire landscape or seascape, and then predict back out where you would expect to find that species based on that environmental relationship. So this is the first reading. This is from the second reading, but of this first week, which is a great review paper by Jane Elith and Leithwick, and really talking about explanatory power versus predictive power, and predicting a space and time, and extrapolating, cautionary notes about extrapolating beyond the data that you have. Like with climate change, we're going into unknown territory as far as things warming up, And so that's extrapolating. And there are a bunch of different modeling methods we'll get into next time, but basically the point is that given a whole set of different predictors, you can have a lot of different modeling model configurations using different techniques that we'll talk about, like generalized linear models. You can have this sort of bell-shaped response too by adding a polynomial term. You can have a coefficient on a linear term and then add a squared term, have another coefficient, and you can get that sort of Goldilocks sort of sweet spot, let's say, of a thermal niche. A GAM allows for a lot more wiggle that it fits, a generalized additive model. A tree, a decision tree, partitions it into these nodes, and then you can have trees of trees called a random forest. Envelope is the simplest, and we won't talk about these two so much. And this notion of a niche started with Brunel in 1917, looking at just the abiotic variables that contribute, and that's what we're going to be looking at in the lab, and then expanded into also understanding like competition, you know, with and where's prey and where's predator and prey, and then Hutchinson had a cool term, sort of Star Trek-y, called the n-dimensional hypervolume, and that's what we're basically trying to find is what is the n-dimensional hypervolume of your species. And I know you guys took stats for environmental data science, so I just want to provide links back to the text. Hopefully you guys covered all these, because it's really just multivariate regression that we'll be looking at. And there's some caveats about that we'll talk about next time too, with like collinearity, things like that, where you can have two variables that are very similar and can infer the relationship wrongly because it'll fit one, and then just using ordinary least squares fit the other's residual. So anyway, stuff like that we'll get into next time, but as a refresher. Okay, so for the lab, sorry, we don't have that much time left, but let me just talk through. It's actually mostly just swapping out a few things and then hitting run, and hopefully things work. Invariably, something will not, and that's where I'll fill in. And let's see, there's a few questions here. Yeah, we'll have a final during finals week. Yep. And I'll provide the breakdown of percentages on the main course webpage for midterm, final, and labs. I mean, I'm thinking like probably the majority of your points will be from the labs. I'm not sure the exact breakdown. Maybe like 70, 10, 20, something like that. Or yeah, I'll share that. And okay, thank you. Chapters 25 and 26 for inference you guys didn't get to, so we can cover that. Let's see. So let's get back to. Okay, so this first lab, I'm hoping that you guys can set up what you'll turn in the labs eventually. When you look at the schedule, it's actually not until January 19th that you turn in this lab, but we're going to be working on it in chunks. So this first lab is just getting the data. So I'm using this example of the image didn't work out. Wait, what did I do wrong here? Huh. I had a nice image of a brown-throated sloth. So we're going to take it slow to start. And we got this guy. I mean, look at that guy. He's, wow, what a cutie. So we're going to go slow to start. And I'm asking that you guys all pick somebody different. So to start, if you could just pick a species, find the genus, species, Latin name, and it can be a marine or terrestrial animal, and then make sure you check out what's already been chosen, and then you just fill out a Google form. Oh no, wait a second. I think I provided the wrong link here. Did I switch these? Oh shoot, okay. I have to update this link when you choose your species. Let me do that now. I'm going to paste it for now in the chat to where you can submit the species you want. And then I'll update the lab write-up momentarily.
Ben, can I ask a question quickly?
Please.
I'm just a little confused and maybe I missed it. So are labs basically homework and they'll just introduce them to us during lectures?
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and normally I'm hoping to provide more time for you guys to actually, a part of the hour for you guys to get started, and then me be available to help debug. And then here's the choose your species form. And then yeah, that's the homework. So the majority of your grade will be turning in these labs and then doing the readings and getting the midterm and final. Yeah, so there is not a separate lab time. It's just we're using the same time, and I'm going to try to provide more time for you guys to actually work on the labs during this hour and get, and I'll just be available for questions. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and if thank you. And if we get stuck when we're not, we don't have you here during lecture, is that where in Slack we should ask questions? And I'm not a part where I'm new to the EDS group because I'm a PhD student. So is that right? Is that where a lot of the communication occurs?
Yeah, the Slack is definitely where it's a good one, because let's go with Slack and then we can reply to the initial question. And because people help each other out quite a bit there, and I want to encourage that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is the form that, so I've already submitted my response. So you want to log in and then just enter your species here, and then that'll slot your species. So, all right, people are already on it. Yes. Okay, very cool. Okay, so yeah, go ahead and pick your species and away you go. So the idea here is first we install the packages. So we're using this librarian package, and that just loads the library if you already have it installed, but it installs it if you don't have it yet installed. Set the seed, and then we're gonna set up a path to where we save a table of the observations as well as the points, the spatial part. And then we're going to use this species awk. So this is species occurrence is a package, and then awk is the function. And here's where you query your species. You get it from GBIF, and we want ones with coordinates so we can extract underlying environmental data. And then this is actually this package allows you to extract data from a bunch of different data sources, actually including iNaturalist and OBIS, which I also worked on, etc. And then there's a limit of 500. So you can look at that function to see how to expand the limit. And I encourage you to try this out with your species to find out, make sure you have at least 100 observations. Otherwise, it's going to be problematic. So you can go back and edit your response and pick a different species if you don't have enough. And then this is just a little bit of R code to convert the longitude and latitude into points. And we can save those. And then to quickly plot the points in an interactive map, we can use this map view. I think you guys might have used this before. And this just changes the background. So you might want to change it to like, if you're using a marine species, use that. So here's some code tweaks and there's some questions. So in the official write-up, I'll ask you to share those, the chunks of code that you use with the tweaks and answering these questions. And then this is the part of getting the environmental data. So you want to set up an R Markdown, and if you haven't, I know there's a couple non-meds students who might be less familiar with R and R Markdown and working with that, so I can share resources with you on that. But hopefully you can set up an R Markdown, insert chunks of code, and then copy paste this into those chunks. And then this is actually getting this SDM predictors package. Shows you can specify terrestrial or marine or both, and then look at the data sets. And then this is World Climb, has been around a while. And this is some additional ones from here. And if you're working on freshwater, you could use that. And then we can go get the layers within those data sets of environmental data. And there's a bunch, 86. And then we can specify some specifics, specific environmental layers of interest. And then we can use this function to load those layers. So that's going to load a geotiff in the data folder that we specify. And then we can load those layers as a raster stack and then view those as a stack. So this hide is true is just saying, okay, just hide the others, but I can actually turn those others on. And we don't really want to look at the entire globe. We want to crop it to a specific area. And that's how we're going to create these pseudo absence points, is to like basically create a little convex hole around the points where we've observed the species. And there's various ways of doing this, but we'll talk about more next time. And the idea is then to generate a background set of points from that convex hole and these pseudo absence points. And here are those gray pseudo absence points. And then we can combine those. And in the end, all we really need to feed into the modeling is a simple table that says presence, 1 or 0, and then which is our Y, our response, and then all of our predictor data for those same rows of data. And we can look at a term plot, and eventually this is like part of this exploratory data analysis approach, where what we want to do is build a model that differentiates what we see in the density histogram. So the value of the predictor is on the x-axis, the response or the density, excuse me, of how frequently those are found is on the y-axis. And so we want to have a model that differentiates what we see showing up in the green versus what we see showing up in the gray as the background. And that's what's going to allow us to determine presence versus absence. So I know that was really quick at the end. We'll have time to go back over this and take it more slowly, but please, for your homework before next time, try to pick a species and try to run this R code to get your data for your points, for your observations and your environmental data. And then we'll debug any issues you might have with that next time. And we'll start getting into doing some actual model fitting and discussion. So next time we'll have more time, but this is just initial broad brush intro. and we got time to get through this lab, so don't stress. Yeah. Any other questions? I know we're at time, so you guys probably have other things to do, but I'm going to stick around for anybody who wants to discuss or more. Okay, I see a question here from Charles. Can this be any species, or should we pick a species with a certain geographic distribution? I think that the main point is to pick a species with at least 100 records. I think it will be interesting to see how these models are going to vary, and we can start sharing with each other too these outputs and how they'll vary based on a very cosmopolitan species that's wide ranging, or a very provincial species that has a very tight range. And you'll see basically the tighter the background, like the tighter the range, the less differentiation there will be, and the harder it will be to have a really performant model. But that's okay. That's what we're here to learn. And it would actually be great to have a range of both. There's nothing wrong with having a poorly fitting model. That's just the nature of the world. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Ben. And I hope to meet you all in person sometime soon, I guess.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. See y'all.
Yeah.
Ben, this is kind of more of like a question that you brought up with, I think his name's Lucas Joppa, the Microsoft, I think it's like Chief Environmental Officer, so CEO. But so you went to Duke while he was going there for his graduate work, or?
Yeah, him and Scott were both advised by Stuart Pym at Duke, and it's really, I mean, I haven't been in touch with him personally in a few years, but it's really cool to see what all he's moved on, to this like they just the most recent thing I saw from him was about Microsoft basically getting to net zero as a company and actually making a huge, like $50 million purchases of forest to offset their carbon. And yeah, they're very forward thinking. And certainly, Bill Gates, even though he's not at the helm, he's thinking a lot about climate change too. And yeah, Bezos has promised $10 billion for climate change. And it's the writing's on the wall. And so we're seeing, some cool stuff. So I'd love to hear more from NC's folks about the latest with AI for Earth and what collaborations are happening there and where this can go.
Learning about like what his background and what he's aiming to do with Microsoft kind of like was one of the reasons I got into this program. I thought it was like so cool. So it's definitely cool.
Really?
Yeah, he was a big.
Did you see him give a talk, or?
I just would listen to all his the podcasts that they'd have with him. I just really liked how he was thinking, and it kind of changed my like perception on like I really like being in the field and doing stuff like, like diving and doing, marine biology stuff. But then after listening to him, it was like really interesting to hear like the power of, using data science among many other things, or, using AI or machine learning to like really change the world we live in. So it was just, I don't know, that was like a really big factor of why I thought this might be a cool program to do. So yeah, it was interesting to hear.
Oh, it's so great. I like hearing how things come full circle, especially with inspirations. So yeah, I'll reach out to Lucas and see if he can participate. And I know he's based in the UK, but at least we're early hours, so might be doable. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ben. All right, have a good one.
Yeah, thank you. For anybody who's still around, was there any topics that you wanted to see in this class that you didn't see in the schedule? Or have any of you had experience doing like species distribution modeling or ordinations in communities or that kind of thing? I know you guys did remote sensing and you actually used Google Earth Engine last quarter, right? Yeah. But it was probably just to extract the data or visualize it, maybe not so much to like run these machine learning algorithms probably on it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is really exciting. I know my background's invasive species management, and we have tried to predict species distribution using images before, and I'm just very excited about learning this. Juliet, looking at you with Myconia.
Myconia, what's that?
It's an invasive species that Juliet and I both worked on in Hawaii. It's a tropical tree that's, it took over 75% of Tahiti's forest, and it's a major invader in Hawaii.
Darn Myconia. Yeah.
Cool. So are we, I guess, preparing for Wednesday? So the class is set up where we'll similar to kind of our Team Sci class, where we'll be doing some lab each day versus like Monday's lecture and Wednesday's lab.
Yeah, I think so. I prefer personally to break it up. Is there argument for doing it otherwise, do you think?
I think there's arguments for anything really, but just getting some clarification.
Yeah, I feel like it's easier to digest in smaller chunks. Then an hour and 15 tends to be a little saturating, especially if we continue with this remote approach. And then I'd like to encourage people to like show up for that time, and then actually do work on things each Monday and Wednesday. So I have to figure out. I think I don't know if I can do the same one, but there's like I can set up a waiting room on my personal Zoom, right? And then have a queue where then I meet with people individually. And Sam's is also going to start joining on Wednesday to try to help people as they might deal with some issues running code and getting things done too. So we tried to get a TA, but that unfortunately didn't work out. So it's a challenge to do like something so technical with this setup. But I think we'll get there. I just have to have things a little bit more pre-canned for y'all. Yeah.
I had a question about the Excel sheet. Just out of curiosity, I submitted my species, but I was just wondering if we're able to see like the Excel sheet or Google sheet where everybody has chosen their species, to see if I like chose the same one as someone else. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, that link is there. So I'll just you should be able to see it. Yeah, it's on the lab.
Oh, okay.
I just pasted it in the chat. That's the one link that worked. And so yeah, you should be able to see it there. That was the point of sharing.
Oh, the response. I see it now. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm trying to set up things so that it requires a UCSB login for things like forms. So I make sure that I know who's submitting what, and then also the sharing the articles, because that's copyright. So I think as long as it's behind a UCSB login requirement, I think I'm safe. Yeah, to share. Yeah, and can identify who's submitting what. So, and then are you all used to submitting homeworks through Gaucho Space? Does that work well? No?
Never done it. Like we've used Gaucho Space in the summer for 4 days.
Okay.
Yeah,
maybe
everything else is GitHub Classrooms.
GitHub Classrooms. Okay. I think that's overkill for this class. So I think I'll just go ahead and do what I did last quarter for the project management and submit with a Google form. And yeah, so that's easy enough. That should be pretty straightforward. Yeah. Cool.
Can I ask a question about the lab?
Please.
I ran the first, the first little chunk of code for the libraries, and I'm getting this error, which somebody on the Slack also got, but it's saying package or namespace load failed for R Java, which then one suggestion was that I don't have that. Maybe Java is not downloaded on the machine, but does that mean I need to download something? Or what does that mean?
Yep. Yeah, that's a tricky one. I'm not sure if we're going to actually need that. No, we will. We will actually need that. Yeah, because we're going to do maxent, and maxent is a Java binary. So I will share out. So usually when I get errors like this, so this is great. We see the error. And so I would then just paste this error, R Java, Google it, onload, failed, JVM could not be found. So could not be found. So this is a pretty common one. And it depends on your system or maybe your path. Okay. Stop. Like, where's the R Java package? Here. Surely. You must have Java installed. See below for troubleshooting help. Yeah. Okay. Where is you'd think that they'd give you a link to the Java itself to where to go. Because that's what I'm looking for. Huh. So install JVM. Okay, so I'm going to share these two links there. We can bookmark here, get that bookmark. Yeah. Oops. And hopefully that gets you going. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Try that.
right. Do you guys have other classes happening now, or? Oh, good. And do you have 8 a.m. classes? Oh, yay. That is great news. Yeah. All right. And what about, do you know if there's ideal time slots for office hours for tomorrow? That'd be preferable given people's schedules.
I don't know. It looks like you mentioned Tuesday, but right, we have a Python workshop tomorrow. But
That's just this week.
Yeah.
General, I don't know. I mean, obviously we don't know about people's TA schedules, but in general, we're done on Tuesdays at 11.
Although,
okay.
But we're at Bren on Tuesdays.
personally, and I'm not sure about Clarissa, but I do plan to block off perhaps like 12 to 5 or 1 to 5 on Tuesdays for like an internship. So I was thinking if like there was some like, you know, way that we were all chiming in about our preference for Tuesdays, I would lean towards like right after lecture if possible, for that reason. But I understand.
Right after lecture Monday?
Yeah. Would you say Monday? Oh yeah, Monday I have like the same schedule essentially. So.
Because yeah, Wednesday morning is when the labs are due. So I wanted to ideally get a little slot just before that. And
again, I can't speak for everyone, but it would be nice to have, if you're doing office hours at NC, so it would be nice to have it on Mondays since that's the day we're there already.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll propose that then, just because I'm flexible, and if I'm already, hopefully we do go back in person, and yeah, if I'm already at NC's, then the easiest would be just to extend for time after.
Do we still have the Bren webinar things on Mondays?
Looks like it.
11.
I do want to say that Jamie just sent us a Zoom, like she wants to talk to us right now, I think, about remote instruction. It just popped up on my calendar. So we may need to pop over there.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm not sure if it's mandatory, but I guess we can join.
I don't know if that's with Jamie. I think it's like for all of.
Oh,
maybe it's instead of the webinar or something, or because I feel like that used to say webinar. Anyways, I don't know.
Are you saying that there's normally a Bren something happening at 11?
Seminar.
A Bren seminar at 11 on Mondays?
From 11 to 12, yeah, every Monday.
So maybe 12 to 1, or would you actually be going to Bren for those in future?
No, they just put them on the TVs.
Yeah, it's typically virtual.
So maybe a 12 to 1 slot on Mondays for office hours would be.
I'm like, I'm going to be hungry.
Yeah.
I'm like, that is lunchtime.
That's true, yeah. Oh, okay. So so maybe a 1 to 2.
that wouldn't work for me, but I also can always just schedule like another quick meeting with you if necessary, if I need to go to office hours with you. So it doesn't really matter.
Well,
I would do a Google survey, Ben.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, let the we'll see who wins on the doodle war. I'll do that. Cool. All right, well, thank you all so much. Looking forward to this. Should be really fun.
Year.
Happy New Year. Yeah. Cool. Good job.